Hello, welcome everybody to the Digital Roundtable on Court Reform. I appreciate your patience here. We're going to give folks just a few more seconds to join, and then we'll get started. All right, well, thanks everybody for joining us today at the Demand Justice Digital Roundtable on Court Reform. I wanted to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Chris, and I am Chief Counsel and co-founder of Demand Justice. We're thrilled to be joined today by Representative Hank Johnson of Georgia's 4th District, who is chairman of the House Judiciary Court Subcommittee and the lead sponsor of the Judiciary Act of 2021, which would add 4 seats to the Supreme Court. Following Chairman Johnson's remarks, former Vermont Governor and Democratic National Committee Chair Howard Dean and Democratic strategist Karen Finney will engage in a conversation on this issue and why adding 4 new justices is really the only way to restore balance to the Supreme Court. We have a lot of momentum growing in Congress, and we're going to hear from 2 co-sponsors of the Judiciary Act, Representatives Jan Schakowsky of Illinois and Mark Takano of California. And then I'm really excited to join a group of grassroots activists who'll share their experiences about how they're organizing around this critical issue. I did want to take a moment to set the stage for today's discussion and really underscore the moment that we're in today. The Supreme Court is broken, out of balance, and in need of reform. But this didn't just happen overnight. In fact, Demand Justice has been calling for expansion of the Supreme Court since 2018. December, we held a conference to talk about the many problems with the Supreme Court and options for reform, and really settled on Supreme Court expansion as a necessary tool for reform. Over the last couple of years, we've continued to build a movement around court reform, and we convened a presidential forum of Democratic presidential candidates in New Hampshire in February of last year, and 8 candidates joined us to talk about their ideas for reform. And now we have President Biden convened a commission to talk about Supreme Court reform. That's an incredible marker of the seriousness of the problem and how he wants to tackle it. But I will say, I don't know that we need an actual commission. The problem is clear. I don't think that we need 180 days, 36 academics to tell us what the problem is. We know the problem. The Supreme Court has become too political, and it's too tilted in one direction, whether it's special interests, corporate interests, risks of the Republican Party. The Supreme Court time and time rules in one direction. And I think the most critical example of that is to look at what the Supreme Court is doing around our democracy. I don't think it's an understatement to say that our democracy is at risk because of this Supreme Court. Whether it's undermining campaign finance regulations in Citizens United, gutting the Voting Rights Act in Shelby County versus Holder. This Supreme Court also has allowed partisan gerrymandering. They've kicked voters off the voter roll, and time again during even this pandemic, they've ruled against states' interests and efforts to make it easier to vote. So our democracy is on the line. This court is too political and it's too partisan. The problem is clear, and the solution is equally clear. We don't need a commission to tell us that adding 4 seats is the only way to restore balance immediately. It's constitutional and it's grounded in history. Congress has changed the size of the Supreme Court 7 times before, and that's all it takes. All it takes here is an act of Congress to be passed by both houses and signed into law by the president. And that's how we can change the size of the Supreme Court. For those of you wondering how you can get involved, there are 2 easy ways to join this fight. And both of them revolve around getting your member of Congress to hear from you. Demand Justice and our amazing team of volunteers across the country are helping organize meetings with members of Congress to let them hear from their constituents about the Judiciary Act. So we'll help you set up the meetings, find other people in your district or your state who will be willing to join you, help you prep, and help have the meeting so that they can hear from you why they must co-sponsor the Judiciary Act of 2021. And so if you're interested in joining a meeting, even if you've never done one before, you'll hear from some grassroots activists this afternoon about how easy it is. Check us out at demandjustice.org/meet, M-E-E-T. The other way, obviously, is one perhaps people are more familiar with. It's calling your members of Congress. And so we are working to call people from across the country and connect them over the phone with their members of Congress and ask for their support of the Judiciary Act of 2021. If you'd like to join us in making those calls, you can check us out at demandjustice.org/call. So really, the moral of the story is to come to demandjustice.org and learn how you can plug into this fight. This is a moment that's critical for our court, and we're really excited to have now a piece of legislation to rally around and organize around and help encourage our members of Congress to be engaged on. And in particular, I can't tell you how excited I am right now to have Congressman Hank Johnson joining us today. He's in his 8th term in Congress. He's a lawyer by practice, even served as a judge for a dozen years. And as I said before, he's chairman of the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Courts, Intellectual Property, and the Internet. He's been a champion for many different kinds of reforms that we need in our judiciary, but in particular on Supreme Court expansion. I had the honor of joining him to introduce this legislation, or to talk about introducing this legislation on the steps of the Supreme Court. And as he was speaking, I was just reflecting on the fact that on one side, he had the chairman of the full committee, Jerry Nadler. On the other side, he had a freshman member of Congress, Mondaire Jones, who has been helping lead this fight as well. And that really speaks to the depth and skill of Congressman Johnson and how he has been able to really build a lot of support for this important legislation. I know he has to run to a vote momentarily, and I'm so excited to have him with us here. And so with that, I'll pass it on to Congressman Johnson.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Chris, and great to be with you again. And I want to thank everyone for attending this event. And I want to thank Demand Justice for holding it. I was pleased to join my colleagues, Chairman Nadler, Representative Jones, and Senator Markey in introducing the Judiciary Act of 2021. And I'm so proud and inspired that my friends, Representative Schakowsky and Representative Takano, have joined us in this effort, and that the Honorable Governor Dean and my dear sister, the illustrious Karen Finney, are also lending their voices to this foundational effort. Now, people have made a number of different arguments for why we need to expand the Supreme Court, and I don't think those arguments are necessarily mutually exclusive. I agree with those who argue that this court has become packed, politicized, and indeed captured by dark-moneyed corporate special interests. I didn't introduce the Judiciary Act because I was worried about any single justice or because I don't like some of the court's decisions. The issues we aim to address with the Judiciary Act are much bigger than that. The framers of the Constitution knew what they were doing when they decided to give future generations the flexibility and indeed the responsibility to keep the Supreme Court modern. And that's what the Judiciary Act embodies. I introduced this bill because I want to modernize and strengthen the institution of the court. And when I look at the Supreme Court as an institution, instead of simply as a collection of individual justices, I see an institution badly in need of reform. Just look at how the court does its work, and you'll see that 9 justices simply isn't enough anymore. The Supreme Court routinely hears less than 100 cases out of the 8,000 petitions it receives each term. Why does that matter? It means that for anyone without connections, getting the Supreme Court to hear their case looks more like winning the lottery and less like justice. And why does that matter? Well, I have serious concerns about whether a 2-tiered system of justice has developed, one reserved for marquee cases, white shoe lawyers and wealthy litigants, and one for everyone else. But the justices have historically said that they just don't have the bandwidth to decide more cases. Well, if that's the case, then we can address that problem by adding more justices. As a matter of fact, Congress has changed the size of the Supreme Court 7 times over the course of this country's history. The first time, in fact, only 13 years after the Constitution was ratified when the presidency and by our country's founding generation. The last change in the size of the Supreme Court occurred in 1868, 152 years ago. Meanwhile, the rest of the federal government and the courts have grown, keeping pace with population growth, the exponential growth in commerce, and the growth in litigation of the nation. But the U.S. Supreme Court has not done so, and it has some catching up to do. And in fact, historically, Congress has changed the size of the courts specifically in response to the nation's growth and increases in the court's workload. That's one reason that for the first 100 years of our history, there was one justice judicial circuit. And it's time we return to that tradition and have one justice for each of our 13 courts of appeal. I also hope that expanding the size of the Supreme Court will lead to a more diverse court, regardless of ideology. There's simply no way that a court of 9 life-tenured justices can even begin to reflect the diversity of the professional and life experience that comprise and sustain 21st century America. Here's just one example. There hasn't been a Supreme Court justice with criminal defense experience in 25 years. Instead, the court has traditionally been filled with former prosecutors or big-time corporate lawyers from a couple of Ivy League law schools whose backgrounds and life experiences have little in common with most Americans. A court that is so starkly different from the American people is a court at risk of losing the confidence of the American people. In sum, we need to reform how the Supreme Court is structured so that we do what we need it to do, and that is to efficiently and effectively administer justice, uphold the rule of law, and thus preserve public confidence in the legitimacy of the court's decisions. Consider the Judiciary Act the beginning of the conversation on how to reform the court. It won't be easy, but it is our constitutional responsibility. It's the right thing to do, ladies and gentlemen. And indeed, the time has come. And working together, we will get it done. So thank you, demand justice. And as we say in the House, I yield back.
Thanks so much, Congressman Johnson. Thank you for making the really special effort even to join us literally moments away on his way to vote. Really appreciate the dedication and leadership and support on this. With that, then, I'd like to turn it over to Karen Finney and Governor Dean.
Thanks so much, Chris. Well, this is a real treat. It's rare that you get to interview your former boss, but this time we're aligned, Governor, so this should be fun. You know, before I get to asking you questions, I just wanted to mention or note that I'm so passionate about this movement as the daughter of a civil rights attorney and a labor negotiator, and the belief that the Supreme Court is sacred in delivering the promise of equal justice under law. It says that on their website. And yet, if we look at the ways in which the Republicans, I'm going to go partisan here, have really twisted and distorted the rules to make the court bend to an ideology so that it's out of balance. That's, for me, part of why I'm passionate about this movement. I'm also on the board of End Citizens United, because obviously that decision was one of the earliest indications that the court was dramatically out of whack with daily life and with giving everybody a voice. So, Governor, I want to ask you why you support reforming the courts and restoring balance.
Well, first of all, let me thank Karen for interviewing me. And the fact of the matter is she was my boss. I wasn't hers, believe me. Yeah, there are a lot of ideas here. And I thank Chairman Johnson for coming on and discussing the bill that's at hand. But the fundamental point, as Aaron and Chairman Johnson, as Karen and Aaron, Chairman Johnson both underlined, is that the court is broken. It's broken in many ways, but the principal reason it's broken is because of the dark money from the Federalist Society has polluted and corrupted the court. Tons and tons of money has gone in, often unidentified, to choosing judge candidates and getting them confirmed with very little input from the American people. This is the core statistic that you have to remember. 73% of Americans under 35 believe the court is just another political body. The country cannot exist with the rule of law, believing that the chief enforcement or the chief arbiter of what the law is corrupt and influenced by politics. So I do support Chairman Nadler's bill, but there are some other things that could happen too. What we really need is either a change in the way that justices are rotated around on the court, which I'm going to explain in a minute, or we need a new selection process. I don't think we're going to get a constitutional amendment. I just think that's going to be too difficult. But we can do a number of things within the Constitution to change the function of the court, and that's what I'm hoping we're going to eventually do.
But Governor, isn't that part of why, and I think this is such an important point, that's part of why this legislation is so important. It's an easy way to address a complicated problem. And I think a lot of Americans need to know that with grassroots work, like what Demand Justice is doing, we can build a consensus for the legislation and reform our democracy. And you know a thing or two about that.
Well, I think that's true. And we do, this is the reason I think what Demand Justice is doing is so important, is we have to have a coalition built around a group of people, which is Demand Justice, that are willing to do this. And so I think this particular solution, the addition of 4 justices to the Supreme Court, is one that's been used in the past, and it's easy to understand. But when we get around to choosing who those 4 people are going to be, I think we ought to put some rules around that as well. So when I've chosen Supreme Court justice in Vermont before,
right,
it's a totally different process. You don't get lobbyists with billions of corporate dollars and corrupt midnight deals choosing the justices, which is what's happened in many cases in this court. What you do is I get a list from a nonpartisan commission made up of Republicans and Democrats and a lot of nonpartisan people, the head of the Bar Association and people like that, and I have to choose from that list. That limits the hanky-panky that goes on, for example, in the choices now. And I can't, if I can send the whole list back if I want to, but I may not just go ahead and select people that the Federalist Society likes, which is what the Republicans have often done. And so you don't get the suspicion that these people are just stooges for the interest of a particular party, which is what most Americans believe today.
You know, Governor, I think it's important, though, that we talk about some of the key cases that have really undermined the understanding that the court is supposed to be, again, equal justice under law for everybody. And I think we should talk about Citizens United and Shelby, the Shelby County decision that gutted the Voting Rights Act. Can you talk about that?
Sure. The politically motivated court decisions that made it that advantaged Republicans and advantaged, frankly, which is now we've seen now as an authoritarian party that does not believe in democracy fundamentally. So the court has become, instead of the guarder of rule of law, they have become the undoer of the rule of law. So the Shelby decision essentially took away the guardrails for the kind of abuses that you're seeing in Georgia and Arizona, right, and Texas and Florida right now, which were previously required to go to the Justice Department before they started taking away people's rights to vote. They have now taken the right to vote away from a great many people in those states, or are in the process of doing so. And the mechanisms they're using are outrageous, highly partisan majorities ramming stuff through with corrupt governors who are willing to sign these things, which remove the ability to vote from people in those 4 states. And there are other states that are proposing this. Michigan proposed it, for example. Fortunately, we have a Democratic governor there to veto all this nonsense.
And in fact, actually, Governor, it's 250 bills have been introduced in 43 states.
All by Republicans, Karen, and that's why people view this as a partisan court. But the worst was Citizens United. Citizens United was a partisan. Actually, the worst was Bush versus Gore, but we can get to that in a minute.
Well, let's talk about. Let me ask you this question: does money equal speech, and are corporations people too?
Right, and clearly the Constitution says no. This is made up law. This is what the Republicans have done. They have made up the law. There's no law that says corporations are people. And what they did was open the gates for huge amounts of money, dark money, to influence the political process. This is not done in the interest of ordinary Americans. This is done in the service of the Federalist Society. These same corporations that are using this enormous loophole created by Citizens United are also benefiting by the huge tax cuts at the expense of ordinary working Americans. Ordinary working Americans didn't get much of a tax cut from Trump's tax cut. The people who got that tax cut were the billionaires. I'm going to sound like Bernie Sanders here for a minute. The billionaires who donated to the Federalist Society so they could get their taxes cut. So the court has simply become another corrupt political player in this process that we have. And I think I really think Citizens United has done more damage to the United States of America than Al-Qaeda has in terms of removing our confidence in our process. We believed in our country. We were proud to stand up for who we were. Now, I spent a lot of time in developing democracies. And I remember lecturing the chief of staff of President Yanukovych in Ukraine about not letting his party be run by oligarchs. And I suddenly had to be quiet and say, excuse me, Madam Chief of Staff, I can't give you this part of my lecture because our court has just legalized oligarchs running political parties in the United States. And that is what the Supreme Court did in Citizens United.
So let's talk about solutions, because that's what we're here to help support. Let's talk about the legislation, and you are going to explain some of the other potential reforms for our court.
Sure. Well, the easiest one to understand is just to add the number of justices if there are circuits, and that makes a lot of sense. But the problem is that the selection process is also corrupt, and it's become more and more corrupt as time has gone on, as it's become more partisan. So first of all, we could change the selection process, and you can do that by law. You can't take the power of appointment away from the president. That's in the Constitution. But you can limit the consideration of who the president can choose, so they can't choose some of the kinds of people that have been chosen in the past who clearly did not belong on the Supreme Court. When Richard Nixon tried to put 2 segregationists from the South, Clement Haynsworth, and I forgot the other one, on the court, those were vetoed, and they should have been. Now, with a pliant Congress funded by money, the same kind of money that's going to the Federalist Society, that doesn't work anymore. So you've got to have a different selection process. The final one that you could use is the Supreme Court, and again, I'm avoiding any solution that would need a constitutional amendment. It's too hard to do that. So the final thing that you could do is rotate justices. What the Constitution says is that federal justices have a lifetime appointment. The Constitution does not say that the Supreme Court justices have a lifetime appointment. Federal justices do. So there is no reason that you couldn't term limit, and I believe in this as a solution as well, term limit federal Supreme Court justices, say, to 10 or 15 years, and then have them rotate off, take senior status, and if they wish to stay on, they could continue to hear cases in the circuit courts. We need more circuit court judges as well. There's no reason that these 9 people, or even the 13 people, if demand justice gets its way, should stay on the court for a lifetime. Term limits are necessary in democracy, and what the Republicans are now doing is trying to avoid term limits, which is why Trump claimed that the election was stolen.
Well, and it sounds like, look, what we're also talking about, I think it's important to remember, is about restoring some balance. And the congressman talked about that, about appointing people with different perspectives and different backgrounds, and not having a court that is so clearly leaning in one direction. And I think there's a sense of urgency right now, Governor, And I wonder if you could talk about why is this so important right now for us to make this happen?
It's really, it happened over time. And it's been, the Federalist Society has been at this for a very long time. This was plotted out a long time ago. And I think it really began with Bush versus Gore. It was unheard of to have a 5-4 partisan majority select the president of the United States. It was also unconstitutional. There is a constitutional process for resolving this process. What should have happened, and I blame Gore's legal team in part for not doing this. It should have gone to Congress, and Congress has a mechanism. We have a mechanism. It was used in 1877 to resolve a question that was resolved by a partisan Supreme Court. That was a terrible injustice and a terrible error in the judgment of the Chief Justice at the time, which was William Rehnquist, and it was a terrible error in the judgment of people like Sandra Day O'Connor, who is a lovely person, but made that one decision that has undermined the rule of law in the United States ever since. And it's been going downhill because when that happened, Republicans realized that they could use the Supreme Court as a partisan tool for their own agenda. And that's what the Supreme Court has become.
But it feels like tell me if you agree with this, there's a bit of a sense of urgency. Because we need that's what I'm saying. Because we need these democracy reforms. We need to restore the balance. Because if you look at what you're talking about, this pattern of decisions that essentially has gotten to the point where ordinary Americans, we don't have the same voice in the highest court in the land that we may have once had. And that there is this solution on the table. I'm going to keep bringing us back to that because I think it's important for people to understand we don't need a constitutional amendment. We can do this by passing legislation. And so that's part of this urgency, along with the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, along with H.R. 1. There are a number of things that are before Congress right now.
The problem today is the American people properly view the one of the two parties as a party that doesn't care about democracy. After Leader McCarthy met with the president in a supposedly bipartisan meeting, he texted his supporters saying, "I've just met with a socialist president who wants to undo everything that you stand for. Send me money." That's how bipartisan these people are. They don't care about America. They care only about the country, about themselves and their wallets. And that is the fundamental problem. And the Supreme Court is simply reinforcing that. Why is that? Because they have been well paid over the years. I mean, Justice Thomas's wife takes large speaking fees often from right-wing groups whose causes then appear before Justice Thomas. The Supreme Court is broken, and it is, in the minds of Americans, it is corrupted, and it needs to be cleaned up. One way to do it is to add 4 justices through a process that's fair. And another way to do it is to simply rotate judges off on a regular basis, so we don't have this ridiculous proposition that that these Supreme Court justices are 30 years behind the times, and they serve the interests of a particular political party. That is fatal.
Yeah, well, it's fatal to our democracy.
That's right.
I think it's fair to say. Last question for you, Governor Dean. What's the most important takeaway for people who might be watching and listening about, because I want us to leave with some hope that this is doable. It's important and it's doable. What's your takeaway for people?
It has to be part of the major agenda of changing the country. The people who are changing this country are young people. And young people, as I said before, my statistics, 73% of them do not believe that the Supreme Court is anything but a political institution. That is not going to change because Justice Roberts wants it to change, because he doesn't want it to change. He mouths the words, but he never makes the change. Somebody has to stand up for principle, decency, and most importantly, the rule of law. And the court no longer does, because it's been corrupted by big money Federalist dollars. And one of the way to fix that is to have an open process and appoint additional justices, which Demand Justice would like to do. There are other ways of doing it as well, but they absolutely has to be done. And a constitutional amendment should be avoided, because that just takes too long, and the right-wing autocratic party is only too willing to submarine that process.
Well, before I turn it back over to Chris, Governor Dean, I really want to thank you for being part of this conversation. I'm excited to be part of this movement. It's so important that we rebalance our democracy and that we make sure that, as you said, young people believe. I grew up believing in the Supreme Court and its power to expand our democracy, to expand rights and freedom, not to curtail it, not to say that corporations are people, not to take away voting rights, not to make it easier for states to take away voting rights.
Let me just leave you with one thing to think about. One of the greatest decision by the Supreme Court in my lifetime, Brown versus Board of Education,
Right.
was written by the Chief Justice of the United States with a 9, or I think it was 9-0 or 8-1.
That's
He was a Republican. This is not about partisanship. This is about corruption.
It's so important. This is not about partisanship. This is about equal justice under law.
Right.
And making sure that we have a court that reflects that we have a court that is not so out of balance as it is now. And again, the last thing I'll say for us to remember, the rules were perverted to get us to this point. We've got to use the tools of democracy to get us back on track. Governor, thank you so much. I think now I'm turning it back over to Chris.
Thanks a lot, Karen.
Thanks, Governor.
Wow. Thanks so much, Karen and Governor Dean, for that really, I think, inspiring conversation. I think the thing that I take away from that is Karen's last note about needing to use the tools of democracy. One is to pass legislation, but our core aspect of democracy is petitioning our government. So just want to encourage people again, if you haven't yet, to go to demandjustice.meet, demandjustice.org, meet, or /call and figure out how you can get a meeting with us, or call them so that they can hear from you, hear about why Supreme Court reform is important to you and why we have to expand the court. As I said earlier, the bill that Congressman Johnson has introduced is not even a month old, but already has 20 co-sponsors in Congress. We're growing this movement day by day, and I'm really delighted to be joined by a couple of those members today. Because of the voting schedule, they were able to submit videos first. So first we'll hear from Congressman Jan Schakowsky, who has been a member of Congress since 1999. She represents Illinois' 9th district. She's also part of the House leadership team. She's the senior chief deputy whip. She has been a leader on so many issues, including healthcare, reproductive justice, consumer rights, economic justice. We're really excited to be able to hear from her today about why she's decided to co-sponsor the Judiciary Act of 2021.
Hi, it's Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, and I am proud to join Demand Justice with the introduction of the Judiciary Act, a bill that was first introduced by the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler, and also Hank Johnson and Mondaire Jones. And I believe that we need to do this if we're going to protect our democracy. We can do it. It's up to the Congress of the United States to set that number. And you know that we're then accused of wanting to pack the courts. But who really did the court packing? What we saw during the Obama administration is that Merrick Garland, who was his nominee to be on the Supreme Court, a good almost year before the end of his term, was denied even a hearing, even a meeting from most of the Republicans, saying, we think the people should decide, and so it should wait for the next election. And then what happened? Of course, we did not get our nominee, and the president didn't get his nominee. And when Donald Trump became the president of the United States, it's hard for me to even say that. We know that even during the election itself, that there was an appointment to the Supreme Court that got confirmed. So much for let the people decide. The election was ongoing already in the year 2000. And so what we're saying is let's balance the court. Let's make it fairer. And the legislation would add and make the court decide 13 members of the United States Supreme Court. And we shouldn't do it via some sort of a commission to study it. We should just do it because our democracy really does hang in the balance. Women in the LGBT community and workers and people of color have so much to lose. And so we need to do it. And the issues like climate change and healthcare and immigration and all the issues that matter so much right now, voting rights, need to be decided ultimately, likely, by the Supreme Court of the United States. So this is an imperative. And we don't have to apologize for it. We just need to do it. And I'm so glad that we have activists like you who are fighting hard to make this happen, who are supporting this, this idea to make these decisions fairer and more reflective of the American people and the things that we need and want. And so I'll be fighting for this legislation and look forward to joining you hand in hand for the Judiciary Act. Thanks.
That was really great. Again, by Congressman Jan Schakowsky, my favorite line. It says, "We have to just do it." And I think nothing's more true in now. Next up, we're going to hear from Congressman Mark Takano from California's 41st District. He's been a leader on so many issues, including he's chair of the House Veterans Committee, but also in terms of caucuses, he's co-chair of the LGBTQ Equality Caucus. He's vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, vice chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. Such a great leader on so many issues. So excited to have his support for this legislation and thank him for joining us here today.
I'm Congressman Mark Takano from California's 41st District, and I'm proud to be one of the original co-sponsors of the Judiciary Act. It is our moral obligation to do everything we can to save our democracy. This legislation can help us do that. We are at a turning point in America. Over the years, the Republican Party and other right-wing groups have operated with one mission in mind: packing our judicial branch of government with extremely conservative judges. Special interests and dark money groups have led campaigns and have funded politicians to achieve this goal. Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell received donations from these groups, heeded their call, and led an aggressive effort to appoint conservative judges across the federal judiciary. In just 4 years, Trump, McConnell, and Senate Republicans appointed more than 200 judges to the federal bench, including 3 Supreme Court justices. This right-wing power grab has significant implications on the lives and the fundamental rights of every American. With a 6-3 conservative majority, the hyper-partisan Supreme Court is now more likely to side with corporate interests than with everyday Americans. Right now, a minority of Republicans across the country are threatening the progress we've made to safeguard our rights, especially voting rights and the right to choose. Time and time again, the court has sided with corporate interests and made it harder for people to vote by striking down key parts of the Voting Rights Act. The court has also slowly chipped away at Roe v. Wade, threatening abortion access across the nation. It is essential to restore balance to the Supreme Court by passing the Judiciary Act. Adding 4 more seats to the highest court in the land is a practical, proportional response to Republicans' theft of the Supreme Court and the only way to restore its balance, integrity, and independence. There are no constitutional restrictions to adding more seats to the Supreme Court. In fact, there is historical precedent to do so. Our democracy is at stake. We must be bold and have the courage to fight for it. I'll be working alongside Representative Johnson and Representative Jones to expand the court. Our rights are on the line. Thank you.
Thanks again to Congressman Takano. Not a partisan issue or a political one. It's really about how are we going to save our democracy. And the only way we're going to save our democracy is by expanding it and preserving voting rights. And the only way to do that is to add 4 seats to the Supreme Court. And so now I'm really excited to spend some time with some grassroots activists, some demand justice volunteers who have been organizing around the Judiciary Act of 2021 and expanding the Supreme Court. Why don't I kick things off by having the folks joining us on the panel introduce yourself, the state you're in, and why you personally support expanding the Supreme Court. Why don't we start with you, Mina?
Hi, I'm Mina Takahashi. I live in Vavina Center in upstate New York in Delaware County, and I joined a constituent meeting that Judith organized to speak to our congressional representative, Antonio Delgado, to tell him about our concerns and our support for the Judiciary Act.
Great. Quinn?
Hi, I'm Quinn. I live in Delhi, New York. I joined the same meeting that Mina just described. I'm really involved with these issues. I mean, a lot of issues, but kind of especially this one because I'm kind of concerned about how the new justices were shoehorned in. I'm also a gay trans man, so this directly affects my life. If we don't have federal protections for LGBTQ people, it's really a matter of life and death. So.
And Judith.
Hi. I felt like it was an incredibly important initiative to reach out and let Congressman Delgado know how many people within his district and his constituents care about this issue and are afraid for our democracy and women's reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, everybody's. This is so important because it's not, the views by the court do not reflect the majority of Americans. And, I have 3 kids and I feel like this is so important because this will affect them in the future.
Judith, I want to stick with you since you did organize the meeting. What was the experience like putting it together, and how do you think the meeting went?
It was surprisingly easy. I've never done anything on this level. And, demand justice really lays it out quite clearly. There's scripts, there's guidelines, there's steps. If you have any questions, they hold your hand the whole way. I wrote to them, they wrote back, we set up a time, we publicized it on the Demand Justice website. I publicized it among local progressive groups and community groups here in our area of New York State. And then people signed on, and we still unfortunately don't have an answer back from Antonio Delgado, but we're not taking the foot off the gas, and we're emailing every couple days asking for when we'll have an answer.
I think that's great. The persistence is so important to keep following up. And so I love that you're continuing to do that. Quinn and Mina, I don't know if you guys have done more meetings like this before, if you have sort of other tips and observations broadly or specific reflections on the meeting you had on this issue.
I guess the one thing that I thought about was, the Judiciary Act is all of 15 lines, and I was really surprised that that the staffer who joined us for that meeting was not actually prepared to discuss the legislation. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and that I would urge, if you are going to set up meetings with your representative, that you forward that legislation, check in with them, make sure they actually had a moment to read it, so that when you get all these people on the call, you have something to talk about. So anyway, that was just one bit of advice I might pass along.
Quinn, how about you?
I had never been to a meeting like this before, but I would say that it's very important for especially young people and people in underrepresented minorities to show up to these kinds of meetings, because the attendance was lower than I expected. So your voice will be heard. And to speak about representation, like Representative Johnson said, nobody's representing me at the federal level. So I have to represent myself. So I try to show up to everything that I can, and I encourage people around my age to do that as well.
I think that is so that's so important. And I also think, like to Mina's point, a lot of people, staff people they're not so many issues going on, even ones that are so important like the Supreme Court, that they don't always keep up with everything. And that's why these constituent meetings are so important, because you schedule a time, they're going to meet with their constituents, and then they're going to have to be either prepared coming into it, or I'm sure that the staff person has reviewed the bill and is sort of working its way through the process afterwards. And again, appreciate the follow-up to make sure that you get an answer. But it really is this education process that is so important for us to do. So I know that we've talked a little bit about continuing to follow up with Representative Delgado's office. What's next for the organizing efforts that you guys might have on Supreme Court expansion?
Well, reaching out to Senator Schumer and Senator Gillibrand. And that's next on the agenda, and possibly requesting another interview with Representative Delgado, since the staffer was not prepared, as Mina pointed out, which actually surprised me. I never sort of considered that. and making sure that if we don't get an answer, if the answer is no, that we continue to follow up and show that there's a lot of support from his constituents for this bill, and we'd like him to be a co-sponsor.
I also would like to add that two of the points that Governor Dean brought up about, without needing a constitutional amendment, that there are ways, other legislation that we could also advocate for in terms of nonpartisan committee of sorts to forward a list of candidates. The other idea of, again, keeping within the language of the Constitution, to think of to advocate for some kind of legislation that would allow for rotation of Supreme Court justices off the Supreme Court, maybe not off the federal bench. I think those are important follow-ups, no matter what size. I truly believe that having just 9 individuals weighing in is just too narrow. To Representative Johnson's point, we just simply need more perspectives that are weighing in on and interpreting the Constitution. Every interpretation is cited in perspective, and perspective is really about your lived experience. And we need a much broader representation of America sitting at our highest court.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, just to add to Mina's point of impartiality, I know that Justice Byers recently spoke a little bit about how he believes in the good of the Supreme Court, and that it is, impartial, and that he would like to believe that it is. And I think that that's, really great in ideology, but it's not necessarily the reality. I think it's pretty difficult to enforce that. So having a broader lived experience, as Mina said, would be really, really helpful.
Thanks so
We
much.
might go as far to say that it is a fallacy. I think impartiality is just, I mean, it's like saying something's neutral, and we know what neutral means. I mean, it's just impossible.
Thanks. I definitely agree with that. I also wanted to just sort of pick up and remind folks, to Judith's point about lobbying senators as well. There is legislation in the Senate, the exact same 15 lines, as Mina says, introduced by Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts. So we're really excited to hopefully build up some support there as well. And so encourage people to contact both their senators and their member of Congress. As we sort of wrap up, I did want to have one last question to ask each of you to take a step back here. We're talking about the importance of this moment and why the Supreme Court needs to be reformed and expanded. What do you think that we might be able to accomplish together as a movement if we are able to add these 4 seats to the Supreme Court?
Hopefully protect sort of some of the rights that we do have, that like Roe v. Wade, and get HR 1 passed so that voting rights can be protected longer term. Take back the Shelby decision. So I think that is everything else. All the other work that's being done, it's all contingent on that. If the voting rights are not there, this is the base. This is the foundation. So of our democracy. So.
I guess I feel that what Karen had said about equal justice under the law really can only happen with many more voices at the table, and just not only expansion of the Supreme Court, but those justices themselves will also bring a wider pool of their clerks, and those clerks are those who are actually looking at the cases that are being petitioned, and reviewing them and bringing them forward to. So I just feel like the more we can expand that kind of representation, looking to adjudicate on the law is what we need to do as a country.
I would agree with both Mina and Judith. I think that we're kind of like standing on a precipice right now. It's a pretty historic moment. Voting rights being in jeopardy is a huge deal, obviously. So I think protecting that is definitely the most important thing. Providing equal protection under the law, which a lot of groups don't have already, would be great. I'm also very concerned about future cases that come to the Supreme Court. And the fate that they have when in like conservative hands.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much to all of you, Judith, Mina, Quinn, for joining us today to talk about your experiences. But more than that, thanks for just joining this movement and being a part of it and volunteering your time and effort and making the case to your member of Congress and continuing to follow up and make the case. Really appreciate the chance to talk with you and learn a bit from you today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And so with that, that pretty much wraps up our program. If you'd like to be like Quinn and Mina and Judith, join us at demandjustice.org/meet. We'll help you set up a meeting with your member of Congress. Judith said it's easy, and we sort of help you every step of the way. I'd like to thank again Chairman Hank Johnson for his leadership, for joining us from the car on his way, not literally on his way to vote. Rest assured, he was parked and about to hop in the House chamber to vote. But really yet another small indication of his dedication to this effort. Of course, Governor Dean, who Jan Justice had the privilege of hosting in a conversation around Supreme Court reform more broadly in 2019. Really excited to have him here to come out in full support of Supreme Court expansion today. And Karen Finney, who did an amazing job not only steering the conversation, but adding her own voice and perspective for why we need to expand the Supreme Court to preserve our democracy And finally, last but certainly not least, Representative Jan Schakowsky and Mark Takano for taking the time and making sure that we were going to have a chance to hear from them, regardless of the vote schedule, to make sure that we could hear why this is the moment. Why, as Jan Schakowsky says, we need to just do it. So I'm really thankful to everybody. I'm thankful for all of you for joining us today. Thankful to Indivisible and People's Parity Project for cross-posting the event and helping make sure that as many people as possible hear about this effort to expand the Supreme Court, build support for the Judiciary Act of 2021 to add 4 seats to the Supreme Court. We have a fight and a movement ahead of us, but we're so honored to be joined by all of you to be part of it. So until next time, thanks so much and take care.